Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin, daf Kufav. We're going to get started from the third line of our daf, Ki'ata Rav Dimi. So before we get started with Rav Dimi, I just want to refresh our memory, how we got here and what we're up to. We were talking about mixing milk and meat, and with that we got into waiting between milk and meat, and with that we got into washing hands in between eating milk and meat. And in the context of washing hands, we talked about mayim rishonim, mayim achronim, and mayim emtzayim. We talked about three types of washing. One before you eat, or what we call netilat yadayim. One after we eat, which we call mayim achronim. And one in the middle, which we then said was completely optional, but it's only optional, that's called mayim emtzayim, if it's not between milk and meat. But if it's between milk and meat, then you need to actually wash your hands. So within that context, we're now going to have two statements, one of Rav Dimi, one of Ravin, who both talk about why it's important to do mayim rishonim and mayim achronim. And this, as we're going to see, is a bit of a stylistic thing of the way the rabbis spoke. It was what we sometimes call scare tactics or motivational tactics, if you want to word it in the more positive, of ways to get people to keep mitzvot. Okay, and it could be that people weren't so careful about this. We're actually going to get today to understanding why we do mayim rishonim, why we do netilat yadayim before we eat. Mayim achronim we already learned because of the salt, sodomite salt, and the danger. Mayim rishonim we didn't yet see inside. We're going to see it inside today where it comes from. So we'll start with Rav Dimi. Ki'ata Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi and Ravin were both rabbis who were called the Nechute, the rabbis who went down from Israel to Babylonia, and brought the Torah of Israel to Babylonia. So Ki'ata Rav Dimi, when Rav Dimi came Amal, he said, Mayim harishonim ha'echilu basal chazil, achronim hotziu et ha'isha mi'ba'ala. It says, Mayim rishonim caused someone to eat pig, to eat pork, and Mayim achronim caused a woman to get divorced from her husband. Okay, now, what does it mean it caused it? The mayim, it's not like the washing caused it. Someone who did not keep the mitzvah and didn't wash their hands before caused them to eat pork, and someone who didn't do mayim achronim caused him to divorce his wife. So now we're going to understand what were the stories. The Gemara doesn't tell us, but Rashi does. What was the issue with the basar chazir, the pig? Well, there was a storekeeper who basically would slaughter the meat, and then he would cook up the meat and serve people the meat. Now what happened was he would basically serve the Jews the kosher stuff, and when he saw someone was a Gentile, he would give them the non-kosher stuff he had. Rashi calls it nevela, even though the Gemara ends up saying it was basar chazil, but it would often, the animals that died on their own or something like that. Okay, but it obviously seems to be also, it could have been non-kosher meat in general. There's a big question whether, perhaps it's a bit how we understand the sugya, whether a Jew is allowed to sell non-kosher meat. But anyway, what happened? A Jew came and didn't wash his hands, and the storekeeper or the person selling the food mistook him for a non-Jew because he didn't wash. Oh, must be a non-Jew, and he fed him pork. Okay, so that's the first story. Achronim, we'll see what Shami Ba'ala. This is a Gemara Masechet Yoma. You might remember this, where there was a bunch of people were at an inn. The innkeeper stole their stuff. Then the man had some lentils on his mustache, the innkeeper. The wife, then they went to the man and said, you stole our stuff. He wouldn't give it back. They went to the wife and they said, listen, your husband told us to return the stuff. She said, I don't believe you. And they said, no, this is what he told us, that you served him lentils yesterday. And how did they know that? Because he didn't clean himself properly, and I guess he didn't clean his hands. It ended up on his mustache. The version in the Tanchuma actually has it that a different version of the story, that they saw the lentils on his hands, which makes more sense in the context of mayim achronim. And because he didn't wash his hands after the meal, what happened? They gave the wife the sign. The wife returned the money. And of course, since you already heard that mayim achronim caused someone to divorce his wife, in one version of the story, he divorces his wife. Okay, in the second version, the results are even worse, which you're going to see in a minute. So, Ki'ata Ravin Amar, Ravin said, Rishonim he'achilo basar nevela. Rishonim caused someone to eat not meat that was animal that was died on its own, not pig, but some other, kosher meat that was just not properly slaughtered, not as bad as the previous, and achronim harguat nefesh. But according to this, the mayim achronim caused the man to kill his wife. Okay? Worst result of that story. So, and this is why, again, I call them either scare tactics or ways to encourage people to do it by saying, look what could happen to you if you don't do this. Okay? Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak v'simanech. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak gives us a way to remember, a mnemonic, who said which version, specifically about the man and his wife. Ata Rav Dimi Afka, Ata Ravin Katla. When Rav Dimi came, he caused her to be divorced, and when Ravin came, he killed her. Okay, now why is this a way to remember it? Because Rashi says that Rav Dimi, everybody knows that Rav Dimi came to Babylonia first. So as long as you remember he came first there you have divorce, then you have death. You can't have death and then divorce. Once there's death, obviously there's no divorce. So that's the way to remember it. Rav Dimi came and divorced her. Ravin came and killed her. Again, obviously not Rav Dimi Ravin, but in their version of the story. Rabbi Abba Rabbi Abba had a version that was each one the Chumrah story. Rav Dimi's version has the Chumrah by the Basar Chazir, by the pork, whereas Ravin's version has it by the Nevela. Has it by the woman getting killed. Okay, so he had a version that had one of that and one of that, both going the more stringent reading. Itmar. Now we get into a machloket, and this goes back to what we saw before about whether you can wash with hot water, and then we had two different versions, whether hot means hot but not scalding, or maybe even scalding. So Itmar, we're going to have another machloket about this, but now we're talking about water that was heated up by a fire, chamei ha'or, and then we're going to compare it to chamei Tveria, to hot springs, okay, or naturally hot waters. So if you use chamei ha'or, now one of the differences is that water that was heated up by a fire wasn't hot at a certain point, and that might make it better because it's what we call haitala shata kosher. It had a time that it could have been used, whereas chamei Tveria never do. Okay, we're going to see some other differences, but in chamei ha'or, Chizkiah amar einot limehem liyadayim. Chizkiah says you can't wash hands with them. Rabbi Yochanan amar notli mehem liyadayim. Rabbi Yochanan says you can wash your hands with it. Okay, again, we're talking about washing hands for netilat yadayim, mayim rishonim. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, sha'alti at Rabban Gamliel, after Rabbi Yochanan said you can use it for washing, he says, I asked Rabban Gamliel, beno shel Rabbi, the son of Rabbi, ve'ochel taharot. Now he is someone who eats his chulin as if it's truma, okay, treats it, makes sure to eat it b'tahara, okay, always to be pure when eating his chulin, even though you don't really have to do that. And so therefore he was very careful about always washing his hands. Va'amar li, kol gdolei Galil osim ken. And he says, listen, this is what I do. This is what all the great people in the Galilee do. They can use hot water for washing hands. Now, like I said before, it's not clear, right? This is water that was heated up by a fire. It's not clear how hot it is. Is it scalding? And then it maybe goes against one of the readings of the previous sugya, or is it not scalding? Chamei Tveria. What about the hot springs of Tveria, or the naturally hot waters? Chizkiah amar einot limehem liyadayim. Chizkiah says you can't use these either. Aval matbilim behem yadayim, but you can dip your hands in them. Now, what do we mean about dipping your hands like a mikvah? Well, if it's a kosher mikvah, okay, it's something that would classify as a kosher mikvah, which could be a natural body of water, could be mikvah collected waters, has to have a minimum of 40 se'ah of water in there. You can dip your hands in, and with that, you can basically like going to the mikvah, but only with your hands, and that's a way to purify your hands, and you can do that in the chamei Tveria. Rabbi Yochanan amar, kol gufo tovel behem, aval lo panav yadav v'raglav. Rabbi Yochanan in this case is more stringent than Chizkiah, and the previous Chizkiah was more stringent, no hot water that was boiled up or heated up by a fire. But in chamei Tveria he says you can't use it for netilat yadayim, you can't put your hands in it. Rabbi Yochanan says you can actually put your whole body in this hot waters of Tveria for purification purposes. Aval lo panav yadav v'raglav, but not your hands, face, and feet. Now, why you would be putting your hands at your feet, and the commentaries say, it's not like you need to do that for any sort of purification process, but yes, your hands. So really the focus is on the hands. Just normally when you do it with your hands, people would often do their feet and their face as well. So you can't do that in the chamei Tveria. So now the Gemara asks the question. We don't understand this. If you dip your whole body in them, then how can you not dip parts of your body in them? It sounds counterintuitive. You could say maybe not your whole body, but part of your body. But say the whole body, yes, but part of your body, no, it doesn't really make sense. Amar Rav Papa. So Rav Papa's going to explain now the machloket differently than what we thought. And he's now going to explain that there's 3 different ways you might find this water, and everyone's going to agree in one, everyone's going to agree in another one, and they're going to only have a debate in an in-between case. So let's see the 3 cases. Bim command kule amalo pligi deshale. When they're in their place, meaning mikvah waters that are in the ground, then everyone agrees that it's permitted, even your face, hands, and feet. Mishkal minayu b'mana, to take the water from the Chamei Tveria, from where these waters are, take them out of the ground, put them in a vessel. Mana is a vessel. Dekule amalu pligi da'aser. Everybody agrees that it's forbidden. Ki pligi, so what's the machloket? An in-between case. Tipaskinu bevat berta. We have a channel coming out of where the waters are in the ground, and then they're channeled out, like into a ditch. Mar savar gazrina bebar ta'atumana. So Rabbi Yochanan doesn't permit this, says we're worried that if we allow it in this ditch, you might think that you can actually use it in a vessel, because it's kind of similar. Umar savar lo gazrinan, and Chizkiah doesn't think there's any reason to make a gzera, because this is different. This is still attached to the mikvah waters, to its natural place. So it's not the same as putting it in a vessel. And in fact, kitanai, they're now going to say this machloket is like a machloket tanaim. Okay, so when we talked about Chamei Tveria, one of the issues is that the water is very hot. Perhaps that's the issue. Another issue is that the water never was valid to be used as water because it didn't start off tepid. From the beginning, it was hot. And a third is going to be perhaps some people think it's because they're now saying there's a parallel Tanaitic debate where we see what we just explained, but it's talking about water that an animal can't drink. Right? That's not even suitable for an animal. So now we're going to say that perhaps is the same. Okay, what some of the commentaries think is that water from Chamei Tveria can't be drunk by animals either. And perhaps that's the problem. It's dirty and it's not clean, and maybe that's also a possible issue here. But in any case, we're going to see whether it's the same or whether we're just saying it's a kind of similar situation, because we're going to see the same differentiation we made before about the water channel, and really maybe the water in Tveria, the hot springs maybe is potable, but not clear. Okay, so it could be it's the same. Kitanai, mayim shenifsalu mishtiyat be'ema. If you have water that even an animal can't drink, bekelim psulim, bekarka ksherim. If they're in a vessel, you can't use it. From toveling. If it's in the ground, you can use it. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer af bekarka tovel be'em kol gufo. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar comes and says, even if it's in the ground, you can dip your whole body of a lo panav v'yadav v'raglav, but not your hands, feet, and face. So the Gemara asks again, just like we did before, hashta kol gufo tovel be'em yadav v'raglav lo kol sheken. Right? It doesn't make any sense. Why should, if you could dip your whole body, you should be able to dip your hands, feet, and face. Elalav depaskinu bebat berta. It must be talking about that it's in a channel. Ubaha pligi, and this is the machloket. Tamar savar gazrina bebar ta'atu mana. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says you can't do this, is like Rabbi Yochanan. Again, Rabbi Yochanan is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar because Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is a Tana. And because of the vessel, Umar Savar lo gazrina, and Tanakama says, no, we don't make a gzera. With this, we move to the next topic, which is, it's within the same topic of Mayim Rishonim. Okay, so again, topic number 1 was the dangers of not washing your hands before you eat and not washing your hands after you eat. The second was, right, which is more the scare tactics or motivational, why you should do this. The second is, right, which it's just interesting, by the way. I didn't say this. I kind of thought about it, and I imagine you thought about it as well. But they're saying, like, this is a sign of a Jew. Someone who washes their hands, it's a sign of a Jew. And if somebody does it, they're Jewish. And if somebody doesn't, maybe you should wonder. Now, of course, there's lots of people who don't necessarily wash their hands before eating, but it is a sign of someone who's, and it's interesting because we're going to see where this whole thing came from. It's what we're going to see right now. And right, you might be surprised that that's the thing that's going to determine, right, or does someone, again, it's all societal, but obviously this person thought, the one who was serving people the meat just assumed, right, everyone he knew was washing their hands, so anyone who wasn't must have been, all the Jews he knew were doing that. He just assumed it meant someone wasn't. The second thing we had was about the hot water, and then that led to other issues, right? We learned about that There was a way to dunk your hands as well. And the question is, what water can you do it in? Can you do it in hot water? Depends whether it's attached to the ground, not attached to the ground, or in this ditch. And in the ditch was a machloket. And again, there were the issues of chamei teveria, which could be very hot waters, could be not dirty waters, could be also that it never was suitable to be used in this way. Sorry, not to be drunk. Never was suitable to be used because, as opposed to water that was heated up, the water that was heated up on the fire was at some point tepid and could have been used, so maybe we could still use it for washing hands. But chamei teveria, which never was, maybe that would be more of an issue. So now we're going to move, and in both cases there was this machloket, Rabbi Yochanan and Chizkiah. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Ashyan netilat yadayim lechulin mipnei serech truma or srach truma. Okay, so if you wash your hands for chulin, which is what we do, we wash our hands for bread. Bread is chulin, right? We don't have kachim anymore. We don't have truma anymore. Now, the reason to do this is because of serech truma or srach truma. So what is srach truma? That means that we're worried that the kohanim might not remember or be careful about washing their hands before they eat truma. Now, what's the issue? The issue is our hands can become shniot l'tuma. They can be, hands, in general, if I become impure, my whole body's impure. But there's a way to say, that was the rabbis instituted, that hands are always considered shniot. We assume that your hands touch all sorts of things, and they could contract a level of impurity, not of your whole body, which is usually a rishon, or you could be an avatuma, which is a higher level, but a sheni. Now, a sheni can only pass on impurity to third degree, right? Sheni is second degree tuma. Impurity, it can only pass on to third degree impurity. Third degree impurity is only existent in truma or kudshim. So for the kohanim, this was a big issue, because if their hands are always impure, then they always have to wash their hands before they eat, because otherwise they're going to touch their truma, and they can pass on impurity to truma. But if you don't eat truma, and you only eat chulin, like most of the people, you don't have to worry about this. Well, came the rabbis and instituted that you need to do netilat yadayim even for chulin, so that kohanim remember that they have to wash before they eat as well. So it's really just for the kohanim's sake, so that everybody ends up washing, and then the kohanim make sure to wash as well. And now when there's no truma, no kohanim eating truma, it's even less of an issue, but we continue doing this to remember what they did then, as a continuation of this custom. So that's what netilat yadayim is for. Ve'od. But furthermore, it's mishum mitzvah. So now the Gemara wants to know, my mitzvah, what mitzvah are we talking about? So we have a machloket Abaye and Rava what this mitzvah is. Amar Abaye, mitzvah l'shmo divrei chachamim. Look, the rabbis instituted this thing, that everyone should do this even for chulin, even though no impurity passes third degree impurity to chulin. But, the rabbis instituted this. Abaye says, and it's a mitzvah to keep what the rabbi said. Again, you can see why people weren't careful about this, and that's why they had to encourage people to do this, because it didn't seem like the strongest thing in the world. Or the most necessary, right? It's just for kohanim, and especially when there's no more truma, right? You could even think all the more so. It would be less significant. But he says it's a mitzvah to remember, keep what the rabbi said. But Rava Amal, mitzvah l'shmo divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, he says it's a mitzvah to keep what Rabbi Elazar ben Arach said. Okay, now we're going to see that it's not just because of Shrach Truma, according to Rava, but Rabbi Elazar ben Arach found a verse in the Torah that he thinks is indicating that people have to do netilat yadayim. Now, we're not going to say that it's by Torah law, but it is going to make it a little bit stronger. So here's what he said. Dichtiv, v'chol asher yigabo hazav, v'yadav lo shataf b'mayim. So this is whatever the zav whatever is touched by the zav. A zav is avatuma. So if a person is touched by the zav and didn't wash his hands, then he is impure. Now, this is a very strange pasuk. Anyone who touches a zav, no matter what, is impure. It's irregardless whether he touches his hand, whether he washed his hands or didn't wash his hands. So that's what the Gemara says now. Or Rabbi Elazar ben Arach says, Amar Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, mikan samchu chachamim l'netilat yadayim min haTorah. This is the source that the rabbis came up with. That's why you see it's rabbinic, for finding in the Torah a source for netilat yadayim. So we don't really understand this yet, but Amar le Rava le Rav Nachman, my mashma. How did Rava says to Rav Nachman? How did he get it from this pasuk? Dichtiv. So he explains. V'yadav lo shataf b'mayim. Hashataf tahol. Wait. if you have someone who touched the zav and then they wash their hands, they're going to be pure, right? It says, and because he didn't wash his hands, he'll have to go to the mikveh and all that. But what do you mean? If he washed his hands, he needs tefillah. Washing his hands isn't going to help this person. Elahachi kamar. So now they say these words don't really belong in the pasuk, and they must be saying ve'achil shelo shataf tameh. Well, the pasuk is talking about someone who comes in contact with a zav, they're impure. And in addition, someone who didn't wash their hands is impure until they wash their hands. Okay? And then again, that's clearly not the simple reading of this pasuk, but it is a possible reading of this verse. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. So in the end, just to review, we have possibly two reasons for Netilat Yadayim. One is this Shrach Truma, so that we make sure the Kohanim always wash their hands before Truma, so we all do it even when we eat Chullin. And the second thing is, and obviously Kohanim even when they're eating Chullin, and the second is, and it's a mitzvah. Now, a mitzvah could be not a second thing. It could be just saying it's a mitzvah to keep, what the first one's talked about. Or a mitzvah could mean that in addition, there's a mitzvah because the rabbis found a source for it in the Torah. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. Lo amru netilat yadayim leperot, ela mishum nikiyut. Now they say, well, if you wash your hands for produce, okay, for fruits, vegetables, well, that is only because of cleanliness. That's not an obligation. Several mean, now when they heard this, the way they read it was like this, or the way they heard it was like this. Chovahu deleka ha mitzvah. There's no obligation, but there is a mitzvah. Meaning you should ideally wash your fruits, okay, wash your hands, before eating fruits. This, by the way, we do at Seder night. That's why we have the karpas that we dip. Because we dip it, it becomes susceptible to impurity, and then we have to wash our hands. So this is a mitzvah, but it's not an obligation. That's what they thought. This is an obligation. It's not even a mitzvah. It's just optional. If you want to, you can. Again, maybe we're talking about wash your hands before you eat for cleanliness reasons. Upliga de Rav Nachman. Now this statement of Rava, saying that it's optional, is actually a debate. Because, now it's not going to be obligatory, it's going to be the opposite. Upliga de Rav Nachman. He disagrees with Rav Nachman. To Amar Rav Nachman, hanotel yadav leperot, eno ela migaseh haruach. Anyone who washes their hands for fruits is arrogant, because there's really no purpose. And it's like saying, I do mitzvot, I keep things so carefully, more carefully than anybody else. That is arrogance. That is not allowed. This is a fascinating idea. Someone who keeps too many things and is too extra stringent, it's not always a good thing. Sometimes it crosses a boundary of actually being perceived as arrogance. I'm more religious than you. That's not a good way to go. And that's what Rav Nachman says, and that disagrees with Rava, who thinks this could be optional. You want to do it, go for it. It's not going to hurt anybody. Whereas Rav Nachman really thinks it will hurt people. Amar Rabba Bar Chana, Hava Ka'imna Kamei Rabbi Ami Rabbi Asi. I was in front of Rabbi Ami, Rabbi Asi. I did the Kamayu Kilkala de Pere. So they brought them a basket of fruit. So it was me and these two rabbis, he explains. The first thing I noticed is they ate and they didn't wash their hands before eating the fruits, which actually fits with what we saw. You don't have to. Now they didn't offer me to eat at all. Okay, now I don't think he's talking about it was rude, but you'll see what he means in a minute. And ubarech chad lechude. And each of them made their bracha achrona, their blessing after they finished eating, on their own. So, Shema Mina Tlat. We can infer from this, Rabbi Bar Chana says 3 halachot. In other words, here I saw the situation and I inferred 3 things. Number 1, Shema Mina, ein netilat yadayim leperot. You clearly don't need to wash for produce, for fruits or vegetables, because look, they didn't. Number 2, Shema Mina, ein mizamnim ala perot. Here's why it was important that he said they didn't invite me to eat. Because when you are eating bread and there's another third person there, you're going to end up offering them the bread so that you can make a zimun. But obviously, right, when you do rabotai nevarech, right, so you do a zimun. But clearly you don't do a zimun on fruits, right? Fruits, if they're, let's say, from the 7 species that Israel is blessed with, then you do at least an alamichya, right, which is like a mini Birkat Hamazon. So it sounds like there was this thought that maybe you would have to do a zimun on that, and he says, no, we don't do a zimun on that. Okay, and that's why they didn't invite me to eat, because they didn't need a third person. No, right. Forget about that they were being rude. That wasn't what he was talking about. And you can learn from here that two people who ate, in a zimun, what they normally did was one person would say the bracha and everybody would answer. Not like we generally do it nowadays, where they just do the zimun part, everyone answers, and then everyone benches, says Birkat Hamazon to themselves. In this situation, they're basically saying, in those days, people used to one person would make the blessing, everyone else would answer Amen. So in this case, you see that everyone made the bracha on their own. When there's only two people and no zimun, better, ideally, you should say the bracha yourself. And there's a braita to prove this, Tanya, or support this, Tanya, that last third inference he had says it explicitly in the braita. Three people that ate, they're supposed to divide, right? Two people who ate, the mitzvah is to each say your own blessing after the meal. But Bamed Dvarim Omrim, the braita continues and says, in what case is this? And we'll see in what case is it not. Shayu Shnehem Sofrim. Okay, if they're both Sofrim, they both know what they're doing. Okay, the Sofer means a scribe, but also it means someone who's knowledgeable. Aval Echad Sofer ve'Echad Bor, but if one was knowledgeable and one was not knowledgeable at all, Sofer Mevarech Ubor Yotzei. The Sofer makes the bracha, and the Bor just answers Amen because the Bor doesn't know how to make the blessing. So ideally, they should each make their own blessing, but if someone doesn't know, then obviously better to answer Amen. Tanu Rabbanan, another braita. And from here we're going to get to what point in your hands you're supposed to wash, right? So generally we hold until the wrist. Okay, but now we're going to see all different opinions about for what issue do you have to stop where. It's a little bit confusing because they're going to keep saying ad perek, ad perek, ad perek. Ad perek means until the joints. But what they're going to mean each time is a different perek. Okay, you'll see right now. Nitilat yadayim lechulin ad perek. Okay, for chulin, you have to do it until the middle joint of the fingers. Okay, that's here. Litruma, for truma, we go up a level. So if you're doing it for chulin, which is what we do, the regular nitilat yadayim, that's all because of shrach truma, to remember that, right, for the kohanim, to remember to do it for truma. But when you do it for chulin, you really only have to do it till the middle of your fingers, the middle knuckle. Litruma, turning now to amabet, you see amabet's very short, ad perek. For truma, it has to be where the fingers meet the palm of the hand. Kiddush yadayim v'raglayim b'mikdash. When you do it, we wash your hands in the temple. Ad perek. That goes now. Notice all of them were ad perek, but the commentaries say it means the first perek, which is the middle of the fingers. The second is where the fingers meet the palm. The third is where the palm meets the wrist. V'chol davar shechotzetz b'tfilah baguf chotzetz b'netilat yadayim lechulin u'b'kiddush yadayim v'raglayim b'mikdash. Anything that's a chatzitza in your body that you can't go in the mikvah, you also can't have it on your body when you wash your hands, even for chulin, and obviously when you're in the temple and you have to wash your hands. I'm a Rav. Now comes Rav and he says, Ad kan lechulin, ad kan letruma. He was basically showing everyone until here, which presumably he means until the middle of your fingers for chulin, and until the palm, right, where the fingers meet the palm, until there for kodshim, like we saw before, for truma. U'shmuel amal, but Shmuel and Rav Sheshet are going to each disagree, and they're going to say, we're going to go either lechomer or lekula, and they're both going to be the same. We don't seem to be talking here about Kiddush Yadayim v'Raglayim, which only happened in the temple. Makes sense. They wouldn't be discussing this in Babylonia. I mean, they could have been, but they're not. Shmuel Amar, right, they're only talking about for chulin and for truma. Shmuel Amar, ad kan bein lechulin, bein letruma lechumbra. Until here, again, pointing, which we don't know, but the assumption is until the palm, where the fingers meet the palm, whether it's chulin or truma, because he goes stringent, because for chulin you really only need the middle of the finger, but he says let's just do them all the same. And Rav Sheshet Amar ad kan bein lechulin bein letruma lekula. He goes leniently and says you really only need to the middle of the fingers for both. Now how he goes against the braita is a really good question. The commentaries question that. It doesn't make sense because we said truma had to be until where the fingers meet the palm, but maybe he had a different interpretation. It's not so clear. Amar bar Hadaya, hava ka'imna kamei de Rabbi Ami. Okay, well, I was standing before Rabbi Ami, va'amar ad kan bein lechulin bein letruma lechumra, and he went like Shmuel said, for truma and chulin you have to go up to where the fingers meet the palm. V'lo tema Rabbi Ami mishum kohen hu. Now don't say it's because Rabbi Ami was a kohen, and that's why he was extra careful. And that's why he was stringent. Aval Rabbi Miyasha bar berei de Rabbi, deha, not aval. Deha, how am I going to prove it? Because Behold, Rabbi Miyasha, bar bered Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who Levi. He was the son of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, who was a Levi. Ve'amar, and he said, Ad kam ben l'chulam ben l'trum l'chumra. He also was machmir. So it's not just because he was a Kohen, because even a Levite was stringent about this, and there's no reason a Levite over anybody else should have been stringent. So you see here, there's the stringent position, the fact that Rabbi Ami did it, it's not just because he was a Kohen. We clearly, right, he's saying he clearly held that way. And last line for today, Amarav notel adam et shtei adav shacharit, umatne alehem kol ayom kula. So you can wash your hands, get this one, in the morning, Rav says. And that will cover you for anything you want to eat during that day. Like any bread you want to eat, you don't have to do it before your meal. That's what Rav claims. And Rashi says, well, this is as long as you're careful. First of all, Rashi says la'achila, we're talking about for eating. And as long as you're careful not to get them dirty and not to get them impure. Okay, you see here this cleanliness and impurity seems to be a little bit mixed in here. Okay, so you have to wash your hands all day if you want to rely on your netilat yadayim in the beginning of the day. Okay, with that we finished. So again, the beginning of the daf we kind of reviewed, but the Mayim Rishonim and Achronim, and look at the bad results that happen when people didn't keep those laws. We had the hot water, and which hot water, the difference between hot water that was boiled and or heated up, because we weren't sure if it was boiled, and hot water that comes from the fresh hot springs of Tiberia. With that we got into also dipping your fingers into, right, doing a tefillah of your hands. And what water can you do that? And in a ditch, there was the whole machloket. Then we got to what's the reason for the netilat yadayim, strach, truma, and a mitzvah, whether the mitzvah was the same or whether the mitzvah means there was additional mitzvah that came from that verse. That was machloket Rav and Abaye. Then we had the netilat yadayim for peyrot is not obligatory, optional, or maybe you can't even do it at all because it shows arrogance. Halachic arrogance is bad. Okay, they didn't like halachic arrogance. Then from there we had that story where they didn't wash their hands, and then he said, I learned from them 3 things about the zimun on, no zimun on fruits or produce, and 2 people who eat better, they should make their own birkat hamazon, their own bracha achrona. Okay, right? And then we had the, until what part of your hand you have to netilat yadayim. We saw the ones who are, there's different for each different thing that you need, but then there were some who were machmir to make them the same, and some who were machmir to make them the same. There's some who were lenient to make them the same, more lenient position, and they didn't really talk about kiddush yadayim for raglayim in that section, right? Because that happens only in the temple, and I guess for some reason they weren't discussing it. And we ended with that statement of Rav that theoretically you can wash your hands in the morning. We don't do anymore, but we do wash our hands in the morning. But that's not to cover all your stuff for the day. It's a different issue. And right, as long as you make a stipulation, this is going to cover me for the whole day, and you're careful not to get your hands dirty anymore. Because again, this whole thing is based on the concern that your hands are going to touch something impure. There's impurity going all the time, everywhere, and you might come in contact with it. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom.